don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never tell me the odds.
The greatest idea in human history, the theory of evolution by natural selection.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As a date with destiny. In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
We're living in captivity, and it's time to break free.
Welcome to A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.
If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, eating clean, meditating, hitting the gym, and yet something inside still felt off. If you've ever sensed your body trying to tell you something deeper, maybe that health isn't just about what you do, but who you're becoming, then this episode is for you. Today, we're exploring what it really means to come back into alignment, body, mind, and soul. Our guest is Eva Hooft, a holistic health coach, emotional release practitioner, and founder of the realignment method. Once an international model, Eva's own health struggles led her on a journey through detox, trauma, healing, and spiritual reconnection. Her work bridges science and spirituality to help people heal at the root, physically, emotionally, and energetically. So let's dive in. Eva, welcome to A Wilder Life.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here. The one thing I often feel compelled to start with when I'm connecting with somebody, particularly for the first time, is what drives you to do this? And I know you went through a bit of a health recovery, which means we have some parallel in that sense, but what woke you up and what compelled you to do that for other people?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. For me, it was kind of like a lifelong journey. I started getting health issues when I was very, very young. I was born with lots of eczema and gut issues. And as a child, I was bullied and just had all sorts of little weird health qualms. I had all these viral infections and always had a sore throat or just something was going on. And I wouldn't say like full like learning disabilities, but there was definitely like concentration issues and I wasn't really quite fitting in the box. And when I went to high school, that's kind of when things like really went downhill. I ended up getting sick for 2 years. I had chronic CMV, which is a viral infection. And I was just bedridden for 2 years with basically like the symptoms that mono has. So like you're just super tired all the time. You can't do anything. So I was sleeping most of the day and then just laying on the couch, kind of like the other half. In that period, I was extremely depressed. I couldn't see my friends. In fact, it kind of like really separated my friends and I because no one understood what I was going through. They thought that I was just skipping school and just didn't want to do the tests. And I remember just going through that and being like, this just doesn't make sense. And at that time, I was extremely depressed, suicidal at certain points, and just thought like, there's really no point in life, right? If I feel like this all day long, like, why am I here? There's just no reason for me to be here. And it wasn't until I started modeling that things kind of started changing. I started to find, I wouldn't say like full purpose, but there was like a little bit more intention and purpose behind like what I was doing because I wasn't just, going to school and following what the teachers told me. And just kind of like the health issues kept coming with me. Like I lost my period for 4.5 years after being put on birth control at 11. And when I started noticing, especially in the modeling industry, that all these other women were kind of dealing with very similar issues. Like I heard other models that were saying, oh, I have gut issues and I can't eat this and I'm gluten intolerant. And there was this part of me that was like, I need to figure out what this is because I wasn't getting my answers in Western medicine. I wasn't getting my answers even in alternative medicine, which my parents raised me in a very alternative way. So I'm very grateful that I was introduced to alternative practitioners, but still no one could really help me get to the reason why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And so because I had so much time on my hands being a model and like, yeah, I was doing some jobs, but the majority of the day you're kind of waiting and sitting around. And I just found purpose in researching. And that kind of became my full focus of trying to figure out if I eat this, why do I gain weight? And if I eat that, why do I lose weight? Like that's kind of like how it started for me. It was very like, yeah, like aimed at the modeling industry. And once I kind of figured that out, I found great pleasure in just teaching my model friends, like, hey, this is how you eat, and this is what you shouldn't eat, and this is how you work out. And from there, like, I started seeing more and more, especially for my own body, because I was dealing with SIBO and IBS and constipation and all sorts of digestive issues. And I started seeing those things improving when I would cut certain things out or like figuring things out, what worked for my body. I was kind of in that world for about 2 to 3 years, thinking that I had figured it out by just cutting out major food groups. I was like, oh, I'm managing my symptoms. I know what supplements to take to feel relatively okay. But then, as soon as I would have one food that wasn't one of those food groups, all my symptoms would come back and I would get a flare up. And so I was just kind of pushed on this path of like trying to figure it all out myself. And, as many of us healers do, and just became this really beautiful journey of like figuring out the answer to this mysterious question that I had and that very many people had. They just maybe didn't have the drive to figure it out. And it wasn't until I found specific methods, one being what I now do with a lot of my clients called a mucoid plaque cleanse. And I had a
Hmm.
friend at the time who was using more of like the ancient techniques of working with that. Like it was kind of like an ancient recipe from Egypt where he was working with like knum, like he called it a knum cleanse, and it was like frankincense and myrrh and like different like clays from the desert. What now today is more like kind of like the bentonite mucoid plaque cleanse. So it's like definitely more mainstream. And I couldn't eat like gosh, I couldn't eat barely anything. If I would even touch something with garlic in it, I was bedridden for like a full day. And on the other side of that, I was able to eat like suddenly like 30 more foods. I was able to eat onions and garlic just within 1 week. And I was like, I don't understand what just happened. Like, I just
Mm.
went through this like cleansing experience and now my body is responding completely differently. So I just really found my way into the space of detoxification. And that over the years, more and more research and more things coming onto my path really became part of what I do today. And, a big part of my journey specifically, what makes me so passionate about doing it in this way is that I had a near death experience about 2 years ago when I went way too deep into the cleansing and detoxing and biohacking space. And I've really started seeing the issue with the whole space as it's so masculine and everyone's like, oh, just do more cleansing and do more biohacking and more sauna and more cold plunge. I really started realizing that like the foundation, which is the nervous system and like all of our individual traumas and how our bodies respond to these things, that was so key. And I would say like that's like the thing that makes me most passionate is really finding the people, and I tend to really attract the people who have tried all of those things, right? Like eating healthy and eating clean and maybe even biohacking or maybe working with functional practitioners and doing the parasite cleanses and things like that. And they still don't feel good in their body. And usually this is when I kind of look at like, what's the nervous system doing? Like where's the emotional trauma coming in? And so there's all these factors that play a role that I think many people don't really look at. And
Mhm.
yeah, just like being able to kind of help people that have tried everything finally start to feel safe in their body and to feel good again, I would say is like the thing that drives me the most.
Do you find, I mean, when people say I've tried everything, one of the things I find is that what they really mean is they've tried everything for like a week. That they've, read this fad diet or they tried this biohack thing or they did this,
Mm.
they did this program and at some point in time they started making exceptions and fell off. Do you find that's a common happening for you?
I would say yes and no. I do see that a lot in general. Like, even with some of my clients, like, a part of what we end up doing is just really teaching them the process of nonlinearity, right? It's like when you start healing the gut, for example, you're going to have days where you feel amazing and then you're going through a die off and you're going to be like, wait, I just got worse, but it's a good thing, right? It's kind of like the body goes through these changes. So I definitely think that plays a role. But I also tend to really see, especially with like how trending health and wellness is these days and how trending, the kill protocols are and like the SIBO protocols and kill the candida and all the things that some people have actually like done like 3 to 6 months of consistent protocols and actually come out feeling way worse than they got in.
Yeah, it's funny. I have seen extremes like that where you have some people who are, it's like, well, I've tried everything, but John Maxwell, the great leadership author and speaker and stuff, the way he put it is, imagine you need to clear the forest from behind your house to extend your property, whatever, and you've got all these trees back there, and you go out with your axe and you hit a tree one time, and then you
Mm-hmm.
go out and hit another tree, and then you go hit another tree. And I mean, eventually give up because there's no progress, there's nothing happening at all.
Yeah,
And I think that's how I've seen a lot of people approaching health is they try this for a week and that for a week. And
totally.
in fact, I would say that a good friend of mine was killed by that. Like literally, found out
Wow.
that he had a form of cancer and tried a different treatment every week. I swear any one of them might have been helpful, but not
Yeah.
all of them, changing every
Mm.
week. But then there's the other version that you're trying, and I've seen this really commonly with, where somebody is, say, let's call it low grade sick. Like I don't, it was the same for me. I had
Yeah.
terrible allergies and acne and digestive problems, and I was in pain and throat and sinus infections. So I mean, I wasn't like terminal, but I felt sick all
Yeah.
the time, right? And
Yeah.
so then if I make a bunch of changes, my life improves. My instinct is going to be to isolate which of those changes improve my life and then adopt them as an identity. And I think that that's not alignment, that's extremism of another kind. And I've seen it both with vegans and with carnivore people. I went vegan and everything's better, so now I'll be vegan until I'm dead. And that might
So
be
true.
quite quickly, but equally, and I've seen it on the carnivore side too. So I'm like, I guess, how do you work with clients to help them? I mean, you
Mm.
call it realignment, we call it closing the evolution gap. We say,
Yeah.
hey, here's what your body evolved for. Let's try to get back to that. What's your
Mm.
methodology for helping somebody find that alignment, stick with it long enough, but
Mm.
equally not become an extremist?
Yeah, so actually, I'd like to pivot back on the example that you gave around the carnivore vegan example, right? So I would say my methodology in a nutshell is understanding that even with diet, for example, the reason that carnivore works for some people is because they are in what's called fast oxidation. So our bodies go through these different oxidation rates, or really the way that you can kind of simply describe this is the rate at which your body processes fuel, right? Like at which it burns fuel. So people who are in fast oxidation need like a lot more fat and protein, and like their system is really sped up. So if they're going to eat carbs, they actually will feel anxious and they will feel like just overall like thyroid function isn't great, like adrenal function isn't great. So you start to see people like really leaning towards these like carnivore diets and doing really great for a long period of time because, right, like it kind of matches their oxidation rate. And same with vegans, right? Like people who eat a lot of protein and fat and they feel horrible because their body is actually in slow oxidation and fats actually slow that down more, then now they're going to feel worse. They're going to feel more lethargic. They're going to feel like their digestion sluggish, slow metabolism, like all of that thing. And as soon as they switch over to a vegan diet, they're like, oh, like my problems are solved, right? Like my system is burning through the carbs and it's speeding up and I have more energy and I have better digestion. But where the problem lies is that we think that we can then stick to that diet because we
Mm,
think that we are humans that don't shift and change. The reality is that as human beings, we are meant to go from fast oxidation to slow oxidation, depending on the life cycle that we're in, depending on the season. Do we have stress in our lives? Stress can be anything, right? It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be energetic. And the way that our bodies respond to stress or to any changes in life is that you will burn through certain minerals faster than through others. Where I feel like the part of the health and wellness industry goes wrong is that just because something felt good for you once doesn't mean it's going to feel good for you forever. And it's the same thing with supplements, right? Like, yeah, you might supplement magnesium, feel great for a while, but people don't understand that that magnesium can actually harm you 2 months later when you've actually over supplemented with magnesium and the body likes to have everything in specific ratios. So now your calcium is being depleted and you're like, why do I suddenly feel like adrenal fatigue or I'm not as productive at work? And so where I would say my approach is very different is that we not only map, right? Like I do HDMA testing to kind of identify those things and like how do you eat for your body in this phase, but we also map the nervous system. We map like your unique makeup in the sense that for me, right, like I had a near death experience. So I have to be really slow when I go into specific processes because my body has complex PTSD that it's working with, right? If I negate that and I would just jump in like every other individual, I'm going to experience panic attacks. I'm going to experience like all these symptoms that other people might not because my body is in this like I would say was, it's completely gone now, but it was in this like hypervigilant state. And so the way in which like I really try to help people find balance is to just learn like work with what you have today and understand that it can change tomorrow. And I feel like I was like the ambassador of holding on to things and trying to seek the external thing to say this is what healed me instead of understanding that like everything that we come into contact with, including your relationships, including how everything you do at home. Just because you start taking certain supplements doesn't mean that those are the things that actually help you feel better. In fact, it could be the conversation you had with your spouse or your partner that actually allowed your body to feel safe, that now you see those changes. So we kind of work with like everything internal and external as playing a role and as being ever changing. So it's like, as hard as it is, I like to tell my people, don't hold on to anything. Like there's nothing to grasp. And as soon as we start grasping, the way I like to look at it is like the universe or God or whatever you want to call it. It's like it'll start to take those things away from you, because ultimately, like, we're meant to not hold on to anything and to actually just be in like flow with nature and to be in listening with our bodies. And so that's what I would
Okay,
say.
but
Like,
I'm totally, in general terms, the idea of finding flow with nature and connecting with nature, I agree with, but most
yeah.
of us don't live in nature. And then the second thing is listening to our bodies. I've spent a lot of time, I'm not American, but I've spent a lot of time in the United States, and I see a lot of people listening to their bodies. They listen to their body and it takes them into Dairy Queen. And then they listen to their body and it takes them into McDonald's. I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that how do you help somebody say, find a more natural flow with nature when they live in a concrete jungle with radio signals all around them all the time, professional stresses that are unlike anything that their great grandparents dealt with? I mean, how do you work to create a realignment when the environment is itself so out of alignment?
Such a great question. Yeah. So I really believe in, like, humans have amazing capacity to adapt to their environment. And it's also like usually with just limiting even 20% of stress that people experience, right? Like whether it is like actually EMF mitigation, like turning off Wi-Fi at night, like working with like heart wiring their computer, just like small changes, or having them connect to whatever way in which they can ground their bodies, which they can actually like implement circadian rhythm, like, replacing LED light bulbs, like all of these things play a massive role in terms of like reconnecting their bodies. It definitely depends on who comes into my program. I do tend to really attract people who have some level of understanding of their connection to nature. They don't tend to live in like, yeah, have a 9 to 5 job, be under fluorescent lights all day long, eat McDonald's. So I do definitely tend to attract people who are already like very aware of what they do. But I usually kind of like just start to phase things out, right? So like, okay, how do we kind of like take off some of the stressors that are playing a role in you making your decisions, right? Whether it's like, oh, I'm so wired, so like I stay up really late because I've been under fluorescent light all day, or because I ate a meal at 8 or 9 p.m. at night. So we really try to kind of get back into the way that nature intended first, and then see what decisions they make from there. And usually, like, when you replete the body with minerals and just in general, like getting it back into a natural state and rhythm with nature, usually the decisions made from that place are completely different than what they do. It's like when you're scrolling all day long and you're behind computer and you're just eating on the go, like all of those things really play a role in like decision making. So that's definitely a great point.
That makes sense. And I will say I've spent the majority of this last weekend doing a final edit run on this book. And it's about evolutionary mismatch. And ultimately, it's about trying to find alignment with nature, even when we're not living it. And many of the things you've just talked about, adjusting the type of lighting you have in your house and making sure there's fresh air and getting sunlight, those are all sort of key parts of that. But I'm reminded that just this morning I had to do a segue between one chapter that's on physical health and one chapter that's on mental health. And one of the things that we found, and I imagine, I mean, it very much feeds to what you just said, is that when we get somebody to a place where they've righted their relationship with food, they're well nourished, well hydrated, they're well sunlit, what happens is their mental health begins to improve even before we've started working on mental health. As you said, they'll start making better decisions. And so I think that really is a key thing. We are tragically removed from our natural environments, that if we listen to our bodies at the moment, well, the body is panicking and screaming for help. It's like, I need calories so badly. Don't you know how dangerous it is for me to have no calories? Only now there's calories on every street corner. So that message is a little outdated. But I think you're right. When you get that alignment, you actually can start to listen to your body again. I think that's phenomenal. You speak about mineral balancing. I want to say, in all these years that I've been in this space, I've spent most of my time getting people off supplements. We polled clients once and found that our clients, by the time they've gone through our core program, they're spending on average, and this is across, something like, several 100,000 people, but an average they save an average of $500 a year on over-the-counter meds and supplements. They stop buying. But I am aware that, that when we're taking them off supplements, it's not that they don't need any, it's that they don't need all of the ones they were taking. When you talk about mineral balancing, I mean, what's your background there, and what's your methodology? How do you help somebody make sure that they're getting the minerals they need?
Yeah, great question. So, I was very much like you. And for many years, I was like, get people off supplements, do it with, with nature. And I would say like, that's where I got myself to feeling like 80% better of, like from all my chronic issues and like things like that. And I was very much like, okay, we work with enzymes and nature's products and things that like help the bowel flow naturally and food-based things and cleanses. And I started to see that it's not really the reality in which we live today, because the toxins that we're exposed to and the depletion of the soil in general and the food that we eat, it's not the same as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Completely different. And what I started seeing is that even with food-based supplements or cleanses and things like that, we really lose a lot of minerals because we're pulling things from the body, right? We're eliminating things. And even when we're changing diets, sometimes when we think we're starting to eat a lot healthier, we could definitely also be eradicating specific food groups and things like that. And I know that that's definitely part of what I did, right? Like I cut out dairy and all these other things, which if the dairy source is really good and it's raw and it's coming from the farmer, like the way that it was intended, this can actually be a great source of, fat soluble vitamins and calcium and all these other things. The way in which I look at supplements, typically like when people come to me, I'll pull them off of everything they're on. And I kid you not, how many times people just after doing that for 2 weeks, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Like my digestion's better and all these things.
Yeah, you're giving their liver a break.
Exactly. Which, we do anyway. Like no matter what program you're on, you take breaks, whether it's like a day of the week or sometimes after like a few weeks, which is so important. And then I also think that it's really important to not over supplement. Like I think so many practitioners will come on with you like, hey, here's your 20, 30 supplements, not understanding that. I think they did studies on this where anything above 8 or 9 overwhelms the body. So like just keeping it to a minimum, and the minimum can be something, right? Like a calcium magnesium supplement. It can be something like a zinc replacement therapy, which is what the majority of practitioners will work with. So let's say they test your labs, you're low in zinc, they will supplement zinc, right? It's very, very like one-to-one connection. Whereas mineral balancing, which is based on Dr. Paul Eck's work, I've had amazing mentors in the space called Dr. Stillman and Clark, and they're amazing. They're pioneers in the field for sure. And it's rather than working with replacement therapy, it's all about ratios. So they kind of look at what are the ratios that the body wants minerals to be in, right? So calcium, magnesium are in relationship, zinc and copper are in relationship, which is why when you supplement with zinc without even knowing what your copper is at, you can actually dangerously lower your copper ratios. And
Yeah.
same thing with magnesium. Everyone's
And then
obsessed
your
with
hair goes
magnesium.
white fast and
Exactly.
everything
Yep.
changes.
Oh, like, gosh, I've made those mistakes so many times. Or like just blindly supplementing with vitamin C also has impact on your oxidation rate. So people really start to understand like the complexity, but also like the perfection really in how the body works together. And so what we do is we base that on HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis. And we basically look at what ratios are out of balance and what we need to give to the body to bring them back into balance. Now, the beauty about that program and what I've really seen, because I've been on it for the last year and a half consistently, I've taken some breaks. Again, like giving my body a break is really good from times. And within the last year and a half, I've gotten myself from feeling really good, but still having like low hormone profiles, not being like peak fertility, things like that. First of all, like having incredible stress resilience, because what we have to understand is also we're giving the body everything it needs to feel safe, right? Like for the nervous system to properly function, for the organs to properly function. So like on like a biochemical level, there's just like signaling of safety. And the first thing that my body started to work on was the hormones. So it really depends on like where your body feels like it cannot fully complete its processes. And what that means is that, if you cut someone off in traffic and it's like a very traumatic experience and you have this big emotional thing, but you can't process it in that moment, the body intelligently stores that. Now, if you don't have energy to process it later, it's still stored in your body. And so ultimately, what happens when you give the body more energy, the emotional processes will come back up, the physical processes that weren't completed, right? Like, hey, you had a heavy metal come into your system. We didn't have the energy to eliminate it. So now it's stored in the body. So the body just starts to dump toxins like crazy, but without like trying to pull them from the body. So I've gone through like massive aluminum eliminations, copper eliminations. I've dumped more parasites, biofilm, candida on this protocol than any like parasite protocol or anything that I've done in the past. Like my clients, friends, family, I put everyone on this protocol if I can. They've gone through like massive dumps of metals and copper. And like the most beautiful thing is that like the spiritual process that's going on from people going through the program is like the most beautiful. Yeah. So like when it comes to supplementation, it's like we look at that. We look at like what does your unique body need in order to get back to a place of safety. And ultimately, when we have those mineral reserves built up, then we are more resilient. We don't actually absorb that many toxins because we're full of minerals, right? Like we are satiated. The body doesn't use the mineral pathways to absorb heavy metals, which it usually does in the face of deficiency. So, yeah, and then there's a time and a place for that. And then after that, you come back off and you don't supplement perhaps, or maybe you just take like one or two things that you feel as needed. So I think there's just these cycles that we go through of like being really intentional with our supplementation and seeing it as medicine the same way that we do with food. And then there's times that we can trust that like our bodies have everything that they need and find really the answers in nature, and kind of like to balance both.
It's funny, the food as medicine or even supplements as medicine thing. Medicine is never something we're deficient of. And nobody's running a Tylenol deficiency. I sort of take the view that at best, if food or supplementation is medicine, it has to be considered preventative medicine. Oxygen is only medicine at the point in time that you're unable to bring in oxygen. And so I feel very much that the balancing of minerals is such a tricky, you take this one because you think you're low on it, because your symptoms indicate you're low on it. But what's really going on is you're so high on this other one that it's counterbalance, and so on.
Yeah.
One way I often think about that with vitamins and minerals is that if we take a look at something like vitamin C, the first one to get isolated and for us to fully understand the consequence of not having it. In fact, I read it once, both the English and the Dutch did a phenomenal job of basically dominating the world because they figured out vitamin C, which meant that instead of losing 70% of their sailors on the way to Australia, they didn't. It's one of the reasons English is spoken everywhere. Yeah. But at the same time, I think of, say, a vitamin like that as a note. It's a note in a symphony, and that our bodies have for all these hundreds of thousands, arguably millions of years, received those notes in sequence. And so out of that sequence and out of that balance, they may simply be sharp or flat notes that don't have as much meaning. So, look, clearly somebody's heading towards scurvy. You can just quickly dose them up on some vitamin C, and that's going to help that particular symptom in that particular situation. But as a lifestyle, we are unaware what imbalance we're creating by playing only that one note and what's missing it. What other nutrients are being depleted in the process of taking in calcium or taking in vitamin C that we're not supplementing for. Technically, there are 13 vitamins and 13 minerals. Well, except that there's B2, B3, B4, D3, D4. There are more than we can shake alphabet letters at. And so that balancing really does become important. I think you mentioned you do hair analysis for that. To kind of measure where somebody is at the outset, and then you're able to look at the ratios from the hair analysis.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing to such an important thing, which in general, like I think a lot of people, even in certain communities that are doing a great job with specific things, it's like, if we don't get to the reason why you're deficient in that mineral or that vitamin, right? If you have chronic stress can be emotional. You can live in a body and don't feel safe because you had childhood trauma that was not worked through. And so now every time you're going out in the world or you're relating to people, that stress signal is turning on, which burns through your minerals. So like you can do all the mineral balancing you want and you can work with like taking supplements all you want. But if you don't really turn off that stress signal from the root, which can be this memory from when you were 3 years old, then that will over and over again create the same outcome. And so where I think people are kind of like missing the mark with supplementation in general, or even preventative medicine, is that they're not looking at why things happen. And I think even in like I love liver flushes. I love the whole liver flushing community. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but it's a great tool that I app with a lot of my clients, see great results. But even in that, you know, certain people have done 100, 200, 300 flushes. And at that point, I'm like, okay, the fact that you're still flushing out stones and sludge from the liver, we might need to take a look at why is your body producing thickened bile? Why is your liver congested, right? And we can really look at like the metaphysical meaning behind that. We can look at like, okay, well, what minerals is your body not absorbing that is creating this lack of like, yeah, just like different consistency of your bile, but then also looking at like, what's your nervous system doing? Because if your nervous system is not in a state of relaxation, then of course, right? Like your HCl production goes down, your bowel production goes down, like all of these things are impacted in the body. And so I think being able to look at like the whole picture rather than this, like, oh, there's deficiency in iron, so let's put iron back into the body and we'll call it a day, right? Like it's such a limited way of looking at this, like, incredibly intelligent organism that we are, which is like everything just playing. It's kind of like the way that we perceive our external environment, like plays a direct role in how we absorb our food and how we interact with the people around us. Like it's such a unique symphony, like you said, where everything has a little note. And if we don't play the whole symphony, then it's like, what are we really doing? So yeah, it's a beautiful way of saying that.
Okay, there's something I want to, okay. You mentioned earlier that you had a near-death experience and that meant for a time that you needed to walk into certain situations with higher awareness because it might trigger anxiety and all this kind of stuff. So one of the things that I'm really aware of is every generation always wants to talk about how hard things were for them. And it's like I don't know if, I mean, you're not, I lived in England for a long time, so of course the Monty Python thing comes up, but I don't know if you've ever seen this video, but it's like, oh, when I went to a school, I had to walk uphill home and uphill to school every day. Oh, luxury, you got to go to school. My father would beat
Yeah.
me 4 times a day. Oh, luxury, you had a father. And it's like everybody's
Yeah.
competing for the worst outcome. And I went to a boarding school where every year they go, oh, the school's so much easier now than it was last year. And, you hear that stuff a lot when you're younger, but then as you start getting older, you start realizing there's a reason that we say that. And that's because it is getting ridiculously easy. One of the things that I think a lot about when it comes to, for example, trauma being stored in the body and the way emotions can affect our biochemical processes and all that kind of stuff is that, I mean, you're a lot younger than I am. So I'm just going to put it this way. My life has been unbelievably easy. I mean, I've gone through some terrible stuff, but my favorite comparison to this is the Queen Mother in Britain. She was born on August 4th in 1900. So I want you to imagine that by the time she was your age, she'd been through the Spanish flu. She then went through World War I and then the Great Depression by the time she got to her early 30s. And then as she went into her 40s, she then had to go through World War II. And then by the time she got to her mid 50s, the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on and the world was going to be blown up. That generation survived some actual shit. My generation, okay, communism ended, the wall came down, apartheid ended, there was the war on drugs. Okay, there was 9/11 and COVID-19, but our life has been a real walk in the park comparatively, and your generation's life has been a walk in a much nicer park, even relatively speaking.
Totally.
So one of the things that I get concerned with is it seems as though the easier life is getting, the harder it is for each generation to deal with that. Like when I hear teenage kids now talking about what they're traumatized by, I don't want to listen. I want to hear them, and I don't want to devalue their lived experience, as it were. But I'm looking at it going, man, if you grew up in my life, that wouldn't even be a thing. So how do you, I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that you have clients coming to you and saying, hey, I've got this trapped trauma from when I was ever. I mean, there's a point where we need to process this stuff, but isn't there also a point where maybe we are spending so much time thinking about that stuff that we're just literally making it worse? That if we just got on with our lives to some degree, I think of it this way. If you want to give a child a balloon phobia, then pop a balloon in their face when they're 2 years old and then protect them from balloons for the next 3 or 4 years. They'll never go near them again. So
Totally.
I'm curious if that comes up in your work at all, or if you've reflected on that, because you are in what I would call the affected generations here of hell, life is
Mhm.
easier than it's ever been. And yet there's more anxiety, there's more depression, there's more addiction, and there's more suicide than ever before. What the hell is
Yeah.
going on?
Such a great point and such a great question. I think there's a lot of factors at play, right? Because the way I like to really look at it, one thing that I do really see in my work is the interplay of generational trauma. So even though the person hasn't gone through a lot of like trauma in this lifetime, when we actually go into it, they sometimes literally have remembrance. Like I have gone through like remembering my mom's sexual trauma in my body, like in specific journeys and sessions. And I think because for so many years, like we have had generations that weren't like they weren't exposed to the trauma processing like tools that we have now, right? So it's kind of like the way I see it partially is that yes, I definitely see people that are like including myself, that go through things that like compared to what my parents go through or my grandparents go through are like nothing compared to what they go through. But at the same time, it was so normalized when they were going through that. It's like their parents didn't make it a big deal that it was a war. It's kind of like you're
That's kind of what
just,
I'm saying.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like right now, it's this like, you're in a narcissist relationship. Like it's just like it becomes this like really intense thing
Yeah, and the harder
where,
it's been for you and the more victimized you are, the more
yeah,
sympathy there is. And it's
yeah,
like a feedback loop of
yeah,
victimhood.
100%. And I am really grateful that my parents were kind of like, they were very down to earth. I grew up in the Netherlands, so I'm Dutch, and it's very just like, oh, just be normal. It's okay. Like everyone goes through these things and it's not made this like big deal. And I definitely see a difference with people in Europe, like from that kind of mentality versus people in America that are, it is very much just like, oh my gosh, like it's such a big drama in specific situations. And that doesn't negate the experience of the person that's going through it, right? Because it's again, it's like what we are modeled is what we believe to be true. So if we're modeled that like what we're going through is something that's really, really intense, then of course that's how our systems are going to interpret it. But I do see that a lot. And I usually just kind of help people see like the perfection in it and actually like the
Mhm.
beauty in what they have gone through and how it's actually like strengthening them and to just build that level of resilience. Then when something is coming at you and it's feeling like this big process, including having the near death experience, I knew in the process of going through that, I was like, oh, wow, on the other side of this, I'm going to be so much stronger and I'm going to have amazing resilience. And I get to experience what this is like so that I can help my clients better. And being in it with that mindset versus this, like, oh my gosh, the worst thing ever happened to me. And I am a victim. And this is right. Like the way that the body perceives things as a threat or something that it's getting more resilient from
Mhm.
is completely different.
We've got, just phenomenal people doing excellent work in psychology and trauma and addiction therapy. And,
Mm,
there's some great work being done out there. And so I'm forced to notice that here we are with the cutting edge knowledge about trauma and healing trauma. And yet we have more depression, anxiety, and suicide than ever
yeah.
in history. And
Yeah.
now I mean, I know I'm not talking causation, I'm talking correlation. I understand that. You mentioned being in a near death situation. So I have an interesting observation about that. And that is that for you to have been through a near death experience in your life at your age is an incredibly rare thing. It's an incredibly rare thing.
Mhm.
Most people, say born after 1970, will face death
Yeah.
when they die. Somebody will cut them off in traffic and they go, "Oh, they nearly killed me." But I mean, like they won't
Yeah.
really face death.
Totally.
But if they were to face it, then I wonder if life wouldn't get easier for them. And the
Mm.
difference would be whether they allowed it to scar them and cause a deeper trauma for them, or whether it allowed them to calibrate their adrenal gland. When I was 17 or 18, somebody lit me on fire, like literally lit me on fire,
Wow.
and basically lost everything from the wrist up, like in terms of skin and nails. They told me I would never write again. They had to take skin
Wow.
off my thighs to rebuild my arm, and it was incredibly traumatic. And of course, you can imagine that in the weeks and months to follow, if somebody flicked a lighter near me, I would just about jump right out of my skin. What am I having?
Mhm.
I'm having a PTSD response of some
Yeah.
kind. And my response to that was to go back to the gas station and get my job back. And my response was to go back and
Yeah.
because I didn't want to live terrified of the smell of gas for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And then if that wasn't enough, about 2 years later, I moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I joined the fire department. and I fought
Wow.
fires. I fought house fires and forest fires. And and today I have no fear of fire. In fact, if you were to talk to my wife, she wishes I had a slightly higher fear of fire.
Really?
So I guess I hesitate sometimes to discuss that because I think some people go, well, you're just talking about brute force causing somebody
Mhm.
to deal with their
Mhm.
trauma. But I do kind of feel like the current model has people rewarded for remaining in victimhood,
Yeah.
which means that they are revisiting it. And maybe they're lying on a couch. I mean, I don't even know if they do that anymore, but they're revisiting over and over again. And no wonder they're biochemically, it's
Yeah.
almost like that event is happening to them again and again and again. You know how many times I got burnt in that fire? One time. I got
Mhm.
burnt one time. I dealt with it for about 6 months. Then I went back to the gas station and then I went to fight fires and it was done.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what my life would be like today if I still was afraid anytime anyone flicked a
Mhm.
lighter near me. So
Yeah.
what do you do now? You're working with somebody, you're working on rebalancing, and you're wanting to, especially in today's day, right? Today you have to be oh
Mhm.
so politically sensitive. And somebody comes, go, I've got this trauma, I've got this event, maybe it's
Mhm.
intergenerational, and I'm dealing with it. How how do you offboard them
Mhm.
from that track where you say, hey,
Yeah.
we have to get to the other side of that. What would be the sort of core steps to follow to help somebody get over that more quickly?
Yeah. Such a good question. I think this is kind of like a microcosm of the way that we deal with things in our entire life, right? Like, even let's say, like food sensitivities. You have people that are like, oh, this food gives me this response. So, like, I need to avoid this food for the rest of my life because there's a fear associated to that
Yeah.
food. Whereas what I'm a huge believer in is exposure therapy, right? So whenever we have something that we are afraid of or that we are thinking that we have some sort of response to, the actual thing for us to change is to come into contact and face that thing in small doses where we can handle that so that we actually
Yeah.
increase our window of capacity and our window of tolerance. And so for some people, this might look like, hey, if you actually have sensitivities to this food, let's get you feeling safe in your body, then hold the food, notice what your body feels like, work with that, start to feel safe again. Now eat one bite of it, notice how you feel. Okay, you're still fine, right? So we're actually increasing the body's capacity and tolerance to the thing, which can be, right? It can be like, let's say that they had a very traumatic event. It's the very same thing where, like, we go in, whether it's in reality, if it's something that they can actually work with. Like for me, it was a cold plunge incident where I ended up getting hypothermia. And so for me, the exposure therapy was like, okay, I'm going to go back into a cold plunge, probably not 32 degrees, which is the one that I was in, but like 50 degrees, and actually like notice my body's panic attack that happens, and then go back out and regulate and then go back in, right? Until there is no more fear, so that my body doesn't associate that thing or that event to something that is like basically holds power over me for the rest of my life. And I feel like that when we consciously seek out the things that we are afraid of or that we are intolerant to in whatever capacity, right? Like a food or a person or a situation, and we overcome that, that is how we
Mm.
truly like build resilience. And that reflects in our entire life. It's like the way that you deal with one thing is the way that you deal with everything. So if you're avoidant of this one thing, then you're likely also not going to confront the person at work that you're wanting to have a hard conversation with because it doesn't feel safe to your nervous system.
Keep retreating from the edge of that comfort zone. It's gonna close in on you. The next thing you know, you're gonna be 72 years old and stuck with your TV daytime soap
Yeah.
schedule, because that's
Yeah,
that's the only
totally.
thing that feels safe.
Totally.
It's interesting, the cold plunge thing. I'm not a super big fan. I think it can serve its purpose here and there. I'm particularly not that big a fan for women doing extreme cold plunges for many reasons. One of which being is our ancestors never did that. I mean,
Yeah.
our real ancestors. I'm not talking about the ones that eventually went into the Nordic regions of Europe, but I mean,
Right.
we spent most of our time in Africa and nobody there was doing a cold plunge
Yeah.
ever. But I had the experience of going to a boarding school in Canada where we did really extensive winter sports. When I was
Mhm.
13 years old, we did a 26-mile snowshoe race. It's minus 35 degrees in the
Wow.
summer. And I say summer, early June, we would do a graduation trip, and it was often canoeing through the most northern parts of Canada, retracing
Mhm.
original fur trade routes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating, hard as hell. But I remember distinctly, like on the first day of that canoe trip, you get up into northern Saskatchewan and you're paddling along and you leave all the stuff on the shore and you go back out. And the reason you're going back is we're about to do 3 weeks through northern Canada and we all have to be versed in what to do if the canoes dump. And so they
Right.
take us out in the water, and without any notice, suddenly your steersman, just flips the canoe and you're in the water. And the water had ice on it 2 weeks earlier. So you're talking about water
Yeah.
that can't be
Yeah.
a whole lot more than 32 degrees, right?
Mhm.
It's just above freezing, and they have to throw a rope, tow you to the shore. There's no, I don't know how to put it, but the weirdest thing is by the end of that trip, you're no longer afraid of it. I think there is something about that, I think that the two mistakes that we make, one is retreating from the edge of the comfort zone too much.
Mm.
And the other one is pushing out past it too far, too quickly,
Yeah.
which causing that snapback. If we all strive to do harder things, we will get emotionally more resilient and tougher. And I just don't see that happening a great deal. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that. Let's go back to physical health for a moment. Is it more important, do you think, to help somebody to feel better, like to deal with whatever, let's say, mental health or low grade mental health things that they're suffering with?
Mm.
Or is it better to focus on their, say, nutrition and physical health first? Like, how would you prioritize those things?
Wow, such a good question. I don't see them as separate. They are so connected because, right? It's kind of like you said, with the chicken or the egg situation. And why I also think there's more suicide than ever, there's more mental health issues than ever is because like we are so toxic. And I kid you not, like I've looked at this across the board with my clients. Like whenever there's mental health issues going on, there's usually high levels of heavy metals. There's usually like even all the way to people having hallucinations and people seeing entities and thinking that there's all these evil things coming at them. And then we look at their heavy metals and they're extremely high. And so what I personally believe is that when we optimize the physical body, which informs the emotions, which informs the thought
Yeah.
patterns that form from there, right? It informs the brain, right? And for me, what I've seen is that when we actually work on that, the mental health instantly clears up. And of
Mm,
course, the brain and the gut are so connected as well. So if you are full of parasites and candida and all these bacteria that are overgrown, then of course you're going to feel depressed, right? Like when I was at my most depressed, it was because I was constipated. And to this day, like if I go through a massive metal elimination and my digestion slows down because it's, trying to process all the toxins, then instantly I'll get brain fog, I'll get depressed, I'll get suicidal ideation. And I'm like, obviously not to the extent that it was, but I'll have that feeling of like being so down and like, I'm like, oh, this is what that was. It's just my body being
mm,
so toxic and the nerves being super irritated from the toxins and producing these thoughts and these patterns. And so I do think that there's, like lithium orotate, for example, which is lithium is a mineral as well. And it's extremely well researched as well in mental health. So for some clients that have a lot of mental health issues, I might put them on the mineral before actually doing mineral balancing and see they have great improvement with their mental health because, right, like again, it's a mineral that we tend to get really deficient in. And
mm,
so I do think there's ways in which we can immediately address the mental health, right? Like, of course, like meditation, like mindfulness, things like that are really helpful, breath work, and then just working sometimes even with like some binders to offset whatever is present in the microbiome that can be causing a lot of those thought patterns. Binders, maybe some lithium orotate, and then yeah, of course, like the actual journey to working on the nutrition and the minerals and people's lifestyle, like that's usually like a longer process. So I think it's both because also then if someone is having a lot of self-limiting beliefs and like, the victim consciousness and all of these things, then that will inform the body by burning through minerals, creating a stress response, not digesting food. So it's why I don't think that someone can be on a physical program and have the same outcomes if they don't also address the way that they look at the world and like yeah, victim mentality, like negativity, all of those things.
yeah, I do think about that chicken egg thing. If somebody's psychology is off, they are depleting, nutrients from their system, and they're producing a bunch of chemicals that are, burning them up from the inside, not so productive.
Yeah.
And then they're not likely to make particularly good decisions about exercise and food and so on. So the feedback loop continues. One thing I think about a lot about that is that if we were still living in nature and we didn't have, Uber Eats and grocery stores and what have
Yeah.
you, then that would remove one part of that destruction loop. No matter how disturbed you felt, at the end of the day, the only food you'd have access to is the food Mother Nature had provided to you,
Yeah.
which would be nutritionally fulfilling. In fact, I've spent a lot of time with the Hadzabe people in East Africa, proper hunter-gatherer tribe. I've been visiting them for something like 15 years.
Wow,
And I
amazing.
remember asking the chief one day about that. And I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I asked him at one point if they had depression, and they don't have a word for that. So it had to be translated as like, do you have really long-term sadness? And he goes, oh, yeah, I mean,
Mm,
totally. Sometimes, in the case of a bereavement or something like that, they could be really sad for like 2 or 3 days.
mm.
And I was like, two,
Huh?
2 or 3 days?
Two or
I
three
said,
days.
like, why only 2 or 3 days? And he goes, well, because after the second or third day, you get hungry. And of
Wow.
course, when you're in a hunter-gatherer community, you've got to pull your own weight. I mean, they live right at the starvation threshold. So, if you're not pulling your weight, you're not eating. So all of a sudden, you have to move your body. You have to, generate all the chemicals associated. We all know the correlation between moving and happiness. It's quite
Oh yeah.
clear. Then on
Hmm.
top of that, you're going to go out and eat some nutritionally appropriate, evolved foods. And all of a sudden, after 3 days, that event is now an event that you feel sad about, but it's not a deep sadness that's stuck in your soul.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that we're almost trapped. I lost my dad last year, and I wasn't as prepared for that as I thought I might be. But
Right.
one of the things that really shocked me is, after 2 or 3 weeks, you start to find yourself again, and but then you walk into a room and people are like, oh, you must still be feeling absolutely terrible. And the next thing
Right.
you know, you're like, well, I mean, I don't want to look happy right now, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know he'd want me to be, but they don't want me to be. And so there is this
Right.
incredible social pressure. I mean, look, here's a funny thing about suicide. You mentioned heavy metals, and I imagine fully that there's a correlation between our physical health and suicide. But I also know there's a very heavy psychological one. Emil Durkheim, I think, wrote the book Suicide in like 1895 or something like that.
Yeah.
And in the book, Emil said, if there was ever a global conflict, that suicide rates would stop, that people
Mm.
wouldn't kill themselves anymore. And it was a weird theory, a very strange theory. But of course, 20 years later, World War I breaks out and suicide basically stops. I mean, yes, of course, there were soldiers that did off themselves in certain
Right.
situations, but the population generally didn't kill themselves. And then it took a long time for suicide to build its way back up. And then in the 1940s, World War II comes along, suicide rates come to an end. What's really
Mm.
fascinating about COVID-19 is that suicide mostly went down across the population, except for one category, teenage girls. And that's because they
Interesting.
retreated into Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on Instagram and TikTok, you're rewarded for being miserable. If you
Yeah.
show up and you cry about how hard your life was, you get 1 million likes. And then equally, you're also rewarded for showing that you're driving along in a Ferrari that isn't even yours. So everybody thinks everybody else's life is amazing. And yet
Yeah.
you get a lot of reward for bearing your soul and crying, even though it's not real. And holy crap, like the reward cycle that we're dealing with. So I'm leading up to this idea is that
Right.
you must recognize that you must have this happen where you're working with a client, you're trying to work on changing their behaviors, but also changing the way they look at the world. But
Mm.
they're going back to the community that likes them in that, that kind of is supporting them being there. What do you do to support your clients in dealing with the community pressure to stay trapped?
Oh, wow. This is such a loaded question. It's such a crazy trap for sure. And like people that are hanging out in specific communities as well that are very much like even people that have friends that are just like, "Oh, you just have a drink or just do this." Like the social pressure is so intense on how we think about, "Oh, there must be something wrong with us if I don't want the drink or if I'm trying to change or yeah, if I genuinely want to feel happy and I don't want to share all my suffering or the other side where there's this pressure of doing better so that you can show on social media and all these things and like I do genuinely feel really grateful that typically the people who I tend to work with, right? Like it's why part of like the community piece is so big and having group programs and having people like actually experience what it's like to be in a room with people who are actually dealing with their shit on the human to human level versus like, oh, but like Instagram and this and that person and like they must be so much better than I am. And that's something that I hear over and over again, where it's like, and even after they enter a group program, I tell people like be with people in person, like go like create community that's like-minded, like go as far away of the traps as you possibly can because it really does keep you stuck. And sometimes that
Mm,
means needing to set boundaries even in family, right? Like there's so many families
yeah.
that really they're so stuck in the victim mentality and the consciousness and oh, it's so sad that you can't eat what you love anymore and you have to give this up. And it's like this whole thing of like, it's horrible, honestly, to deal with that. But like,
It's really
how
crazy too, is you can take somebody who's 35 pounds overweight and they order a double chocolate frosted bomb cake and nobody says a bloody word, but they have a salad and everybody's got an opinion.
I know. It's literally like I saw this post the other day of someone like, you can eat garbage all day, like you said, and no one worries about you. And then you say you're going to do a 3-day fast and everyone thinks you're going to die. It's like this wild view, like even my parents, like, and I love them and I've really shown them, but like they always have to tell me, like, I just wonder if what you're doing, like, you're just, like you're putting your body through, just like be normal, like why don't you just like eat normal and just like don't worry about it too much, like your body can handle things. And they're over there with like chronic illness and like, like, gosh, it's just wild, like the resistance from society that we have to
Mm.
beat up against if we actually want to take a stand for our health and go back to the way that, yeah, nature intended it, which includes like sometimes not eating the meal at, that everyone else is eating. Or for me, it's like I'll go to a dinner and just be there and not participate and just be there for the social gathering. And to constantly have to face that, the pressure can be a lot. But I do really see that like it's changing in ways where people are actually waking up to this fact of like, oh, like I probably should start to find community that's a bit more aligned with like my views and my take on things. And for a lot of people, that includes coming off of social media or not looking at that as much, or just going on a detox of their phone in general for like a few weeks and really waking up to the normal part of human being.
I left my phone in an Uber in Riyadh a few days ago in Saudi Arabia, and Uber was useless getting it back. I mean, honestly, they were useless. And so all of a sudden now I don't have a phone, and I'm traveling, and I got to get cars, Ubers, and bank transfers and credit cards. I mean, we're very integrated in our phones.
Mhm.
But what was fascinating is now all of a sudden I'm sitting in cars driving an hour to the airport, and I have time to think
Yeah.
and I have time to have conversation. And it reminded me that about 10 years ago, I went through a theft where basically almost everything I had was stolen, including my phone and everything else. And I replaced everything else, but I didn't replace the phone. And I lived without a phone for 6.5 months. I just
Wow.
didn't have one. And I was like the only human left on the planet that,
Yeah.
that didn't have a phone. And during that time, I wrote an entire fictional book, a detailed Tom Clancy-esque global thriller type thing. And I had the time, I had the creativity for it. And then, of course, I was married at the time and my wife got pregnant. And so I had to get a phone. I couldn't not have a phone if she was going to be pregnant. That was different.
Yeah, yeah.
But I found the last couple of days without one, like even now it's working on rebooting itself. But I basically been 3 or 4 days without a phone.
Mhm.
And it's like I met myself again. And I think there's something really valuable in that digital detox frame of mind. My eldest daughter, our eldest daughter, she's 20 now, and she started a podcast called Adulting with Amelia because she's 20 years old. She's also doing modeling, and then she's looking at the world and AI and the political divide and the food industry and all this. And she went through a huge health thing of her own. Like she was really, really suffering. And she found her way into a sort of version of what we call Wild Fit Spring, which is sort of adjacent to carnivore. And she's turned her whole life around. But now she's started her podcast to basically go out and find the answers for the other 20-year-olds. I can't even imagine what looking at the world is like from your generation's perspective. The
Right.
pace of change is so phenomenally interesting and fast, but I do think that the way we all deal with it is by going into it and not recoiling from it. The people who are afraid of AI are the ones that will lose their jobs to AI. The people that are, going back to what we were just talking about around, are you willing to make the changes and are your friends going to let you? We have an expression in my company, WildFit, and that's that people will say, we'll tell them, look, when you go to the restaurant, just order it without that and, take that out or do whatever. And they go, well, I don't know, Eva, I don't want to be that person.
I
And we're like,
know.
hold on, you don't want to be that person? Now, let's just be clear about that person. That person is a lot less likely to develop diabetes. That person's a lot less likely to get cancer. That person's a lot less likely to have a coronary event. That person's a lot less likely to spend the last 20 of their lives with tubes and machines and surgeries, keeping them alive in some version of the Frankenstein medical system. And by the end of that little, they're like, okay, I'm willing to be that person.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true.
Anyway, I was thinking of Amelia, so I'm going to make sure she checks out your podcast because I think she'll find that interesting. You're definitely delving into a lot of the areas that she's fascinated by and so on. But with that in mind, how do our people find you? Where are your programs? How do they tell us about your podcast and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I've gone on a journey with my podcast. I'm currently taking a pause on season 2 because luckily things are really taking off in the business and just trying to juggle like training a new team and all the things. But yeah, like there are, I think about maybe like 30 some episodes online there. So it's the Realignment podcast. I definitely love bringing in speakers, which it sounds like you are as well, that are just like experts in the field, or we just sit down and have a conversation about like science and consciousness and spirituality. So that's definitely something they can check out. Everything is to be found on my website. So it's evahooft.com. So my first and last name.com. My Instagram is also Eva Hooft or eva.hooft. And you can find everything from like my group programs, the mineral balancing information, one-on-one programs. I have a 10-day mucoid plaque cleanse, one that I now offer to my community for people as an intro experience. I share a lot of free information on my social media. I think that's my favorite way of expression. I have an amazing team who helps me with that. So things, master classes, mini guides, just tips in general to just help you get closer to nature, just help you avoid a lot of the toxins in daily life. So I would say people can check that out for free resources.
That sounds great. Well, I will make sure that we share all that stuff in the show notes and make sure people get connected with you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me today. It's been fun, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you as well. It's such a pleasure.
Hey, everybody, another episode of A Wilder Life. And I want to remind you that the entire mission here is to really take a look at what we are struggling with in modern civilization and closing those gaps so that we can take advantage of both what we know about our evolutionary past and what you might call ancestral wisdom, but that we can also combine that with the phenomenal things that are happening in modern civilization to create the truly peak human experience. And so if you've enjoyed this episode, and then I suggest that you like it and comment on it and subscribe to it and share it with the people who need to hear it. For now, stay wild, and I'll see you on another episode of A Wilder Life.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Wilder Life. Please leave a review and share it. A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.